boys, and welcome back to Reading Club. Today I'm going to read you Dirty Bertie, Worms, Story 2, Manners. Chapter 1. Bertie had no manners. His family all agreed. He lollied, he fidgeted, and talked with his mouth full. He sniffed and slurped and burped and picked his nose. Bertie, use a hanky. Take your elbows off the table. Don't touch that. It's dirty, Bertie. His parents moaned every day. Bertie didn't see the point. Animals don't make all this fuss. Did pigs or dogs have manners? When Woofer weed against a tree, no one seemed to mind. Yet if Bertie had done that, his mom would have fainted on the spot. No, in Bertie's opinion, manners were a waste of time. But that was before he heard about the prize. It was the head teacher, Miss Skinner, who had announced the prize in assembly one morning. Does anyone know what tomorrow is? She asked. Her gaze fell on Bertie, who was crossing his eyes at Darren. Bertie, she said. Yes, miss? Do you know what tomorrow is? Bertie thought. Tuesday, he said. Miss Skinner gave him one of her looks. Tomorrow, she said, is National Courtesy Day. It's a day when we should be especially polite, so I want us all to think about our manners. We are lucky to have Miss Prim from the library coming to visit us, and she has agreed to present a very special prize to the child with the best manners. Huh, special prize, said Bertie to Darren as they trooped back to the classroom. I bet it's some boring old book about being polite. Actually, it's not, said a reedy voice behind them. It was Know-It-All Nick, Bertie's worst enemy. How do you know? Asked Bertie. Because I heard Miss Skinner tell Miss Boot, says Nick, looking pleased with himself. She said the tickets had come this morning. Tickets for what? Asked Darren. Wouldn't you like to know? Sneered Nick, who would have liked to know himself. I bet it's football tickets, said Darren. Or cinema tickets, said Donna. Or tickets for Mega Mayhem, said Bertie, his eyes lighting up. Mega Mayhem was the best theme park in the world, and he'd been begging to go for months. It doesn't matter what it is, says Nick smugly. I'm bound to win. My mom says I've got beautiful manners. It's a pity your face is so ugly, muttered Bertie. Bertie thought about the prize for the rest of the day. He was sure the tickets were for Mega Mayhem, and he'd made up his mind to win them. Even if it meant he had to be polite for a whole day, he didn't care. After all, how hard could it be? Chapter 2. The next morning, Bertie bounded out of bed. Today was National Courtesy Day, the day he was going to win the prize. On the landing, he met his mom returning from the bathroom. Good morning, Mom, he said. Isn't it a lovely morning? His mom gave him a suspicious look. What have you done, Bertie? I haven't done anything, said Bertie. I was just being polite. Downstairs, Dad and Susie were eating breakfast. Good morning, Bertie greeted them cheerfully as he sat down. He poured Frosty Flakes into his bowl and cleared his throat. Ahem, would you pass the milk, please, Susie? Susie stared at him. Why are you talking in that funny way? It's not a funny way, thank you. It's called being polite. Bertie poured milk into his bowl without spilling a drop and sucked his Frosty Flakes so as not to make a noise. Even when he dropped his spoon, he was careful to wipe it on his jumper before putting it in his mouth. I might be getting a prize today, he announced. Dad looked up. What kind of prize? For being polite, says Bertie. It's National Courtesy Day, and they're giving a prize for being polite. You polite! Ha! Snorted Susie. Bertie sniffed. I'm more polite than you, fat face. Nose, Bertie, said Dad. Where's your hanky? Bertie pulled a grubby hanky from his pocket and wiped his nose. Something fell out and plopped into the sugar bowl. "Ah!" shrieked Susie. "What's that?" "It's only Buzz. He won't hurt you," said Bertie, picking out the large blue bottle. "Bertie, it's a dead fly," said Dad. "I know," replied Bertie. "Don't worry. I'm going to bury him." Bertie had found Buzz lying on his windowsill. He had decided to bury him under the apple tree. He blew off the sugar that was stuck to his wings. "Put it away," said Dad. "It's filthy." Bertie sighed and wrapped Buzz inside his hanky. He would bury him after school. That was the trouble, he thought. You did your best to be polite, and all you got was people shouting at you. Chapter 3. Miss Prim stood at the front of the class. She was tall and thin. Her glasses hung around her neck on a cord. Bertie thought she must be 100 at least. He'd seen Miss Prim at the library where she stood behind a desk and stamped people's books. He hoped she didn't remember him. Last time he'd been to the library, Whiffer had done something in the story corner, and they'd had to leave quickly. "This is Miss Prim," said Miss Boot. "I hope we're all going to show her how well-mannered we can be." She ran her eye over the class, who were all sitting up straight and paying attention. It was marvelous, the effect a prize could have. Even Bertie wasn't lowly in his seat or pushing a pencil up his nose. Miss Prim talked to the class about the importance of good manners. Bertie tried to listen, but his mind kept drifting off. He was imagining whizzing down the side of doom at Mega Mayhem. "Now," said Miss Boot, "who would like to show our visitor around the school? Let's have 2 volunteers." Bertie's hand shot in the air. This was his chance to show Miss Prim how polite he could be. Unfortunately, everyone else in his class had the same idea. 30 children strained out of their seats, waving their hands in the air. "Miss, miss, please, miss." Miss Boot pointed. "Nick, I'm sure you'll look after our visitor." Bertie couldn't believe it. Not Noel Nick. Why did he always get picked? Just because he'd made Miss Boot a soapy card on her birthday. It wasn't fair. Bertie never got picked for anything. Miss Boot hesitated. She needed someone else who was polite and reliable. "Miss, miss, me, miss." "What about that boy at the back who's sitting so quietly?" suggested Miss Prim. "Oh," said Miss Boot, "not Bertie." Bertie, who hadn't been listening, looked up. "Me?" he said. Miss Prim walked down the corridor, admiring the paintings on the walls. "That one's mine," said Nick, pointing to a bright picture of a sunset. "And that one's mine," said Bertie, pointing to a splodgy mess of green. "That's an alien, and that's his dinner inside him." "Ah," said Miss Prim. "How, unusual." "Don't we have a hanky, Bertie?" "Oh, yes, excuse me," said Bertie. He pulled out his hanky and offered it to Miss Prim. "No, I meant to you. You need to wipe your nose." "Oh, thanks," said Bertie. He wiped his nose on his sleeve and pocketed his hanky. He just remembered Buzz was wrapped inside, and he didn't want him falling out. Miss Prim sighed heavily. "Perhaps you could look in the next class," she said. Nick started to walk ahead quickly. Bertie kept pace with him. There was a mad dash for the door, and they both grabbed the handle at once. "I was first." I was." Miss Prim caught up with them. Boys, I hope we're not squabbling," she said. "Oh, no," smiled Nick. "I was just telling Bertie his shirt's hanging out." Bertie looked behind him. Nick wrenched open the door, squishing Bertie behind it. "After you, miss," said Nick. Miss Prim beamed at him. "Thank you, Nicholas. It's nice to see someone who remembers their manners." Chapter 4. By lunchtime, Bertie was exhausted. Being polite was hard work, especially with know-it-all Nick trying to outdo him the whole time. And now it looked as if he was stuck with Miss Prim for lunch. As they crossed the hall, Bertie could hardly believe his eyes. No one in the dinner queue was pushing and shoving. There was no running or fighting or firing peas across the room. Everyone was eating their lunch quietly and politely. "Hello, Miss Prim," called Donut as they passed by. Bertie gulped. 3 of his teachers were waiting for them at the table laid with a white tablecloth and a vase of flowers. "Do come and join us," said Miss Skinner. "Bertie will fetch your lunch." Careful you don't drop it, Bertie," whispered old Nick. "Careful I don't drop it on you," muttered Bertie. Bertie sat opposite Miss Prim and Noel Nick and stared at the plate in front of him. Spaghetti. How was he meant to eat without making a mess? He watched Miss Prim wind spaghetti round her fork and tried to copy her. The spaghetti fell off before it reached his mouth. Nick put a hand over his mouth and loudly sucked up a piece of spaghetti. "Bertie," he said, "don't be so disgusting." The teachers all looked in Bertie's direction. "But it wasn't me," gasped Bertie. "It was him." Miss Prim made a tutting noise. "Don't tell tales, Bertie. It isn't nice." Bertie turned to glare at Nick. He would have liked to put spaghetti down his neck. He would have liked to pour a jug of water down his pants. But he wanted those tickets, and Miss Prim was watching him like a hawk. As he lifted his fork to his mouth, a hand jogged his elbow. Splat! A splodge of sauce landed on the white tablecloth. "Oh, Bertie, you are messy," jeered Nick. "Look what you've done." Miss Prim made another tutting noise. "But it wasn't me!" shouted Bertie. Miss Boot glared. Bertie ground his teeth. He would get that two-faced slimy sneak. Nick was sent to fetch dessert. Bertie's eyes lit up. Chocolate fudge cake, his favorite. He reached out to grab a piece. "Manners, Bertie," Miss Prim reminded him. "We don't grab. We offer the plate to others." Bertie reluctantly passed the cake around the table. Miss Skinner took a slice, so did Miss Boot and Mr. Plummy. Bertie watched anxiously as the cake began to disappear. "Oh dear," says Miss Prim, helping herself. "Only one piece left. Which of you is going to have it?" Bertie looked at Nick. Nick looked at Bertie. Both of them eyed the last slice of fudge cake. Then Nick did a surprising thing. He offered the plate to Bertie. "You have it, Bertie," he said with a sickly smile. "I don't mind, really." Bertie wasn't going to fall for that one. "That's okay, Nick. I want you to have it." "Oh, well, if you insist," said Nick. "We don't want it going to waste." He snatched the last piece and took a large bite. "Thanks, Bertie." Bertie glared furiously. He'd been tricked. Well, that was it. No more manners. This was war. That fudge cake was his by right, and he was going to get it back. Bertie reached into his pocket and brought out his hanky. Nick was too busy talking to Miss Prim to notice a hand dart across the table. "Any seconds now," thought Bertie. 5, 4, 3, 2. Nick reached for the cake and raised it to his mouth. There was something black on top. "Ah! A fly!" screamed Nick, dropping the cake on the table. "Ah!" shrieked Miss Prim as Buzz landed in front of her. "I'll get it!" cried Miss Skinner. She seized a spoon and attacked the blue bottle. Smack, whack, thump. Plates and cups leaped in the air. Buzz hopped and jumped with each blow, showing surprising speed for a dead fly. Miss Boo grabbed the water jug and emptied it over the table. Sploosh! Buzz lay still in a puddle with his leg in the air. "Is it dead?" asked Miss Skinner. She picked up the fly by one leg and examined it. The silence was broken by a loud burp. 6 pairs of eyes turned on Bertie. He had cake crumbs around his mouth and a satisfied smile on his face. "Bertie," said Miss Skinner. Pardon me," said Bertie politely. He held out his hand. "Could I have my fly back, please?" Later that afternoon, Bertie crowded into the hall with everyone else. The moment had arrived for Miss Prim to announce the winner of the prize. Bertie knew he didn't stand a chance, not after all the trouble at lunchtime. At least he'd been able to rescue Buzz from the litter bin. In any case, it had all been worth it to see the look on Noel Nick's face when he'd come eye to eye with Buzz. Bertie didn't mind who won the prize as long as it wasn't Nick. "And the winner," said Miss Prim, "is Nicholas Payne." Bertie groaned. Noel Nick made his way to the front and shook Miss Prim's hand. Everyone craned their necks to see what his prize would be. Miss Prim handed him an envelope. "As you're always so polite, I'm sure you're going to love this. It's 2 tickets for the Museum of Manners in London." Nick turned white. His mouth gaped open, but nothing came out. Bertie leaned forward. "Manners, Nick," he said. "Aren't you going to say thank you?" That's the end of this channel. If you liked it, please click many likes and subscribe Reading Club. I'll come back later with a new and improved channel. Bye, everybody.